We are connecting through starlight this day. Our vibration is a slightly different one than the counterparts that you connected to the last time. That is, we exist more in a layer of eternity where everything is seen, held, and understood at once. But dearest Tham, we, the 9D Syrian collective, coming to you from that star you call the dog star, we greet you with happy barks and the wagging of a tail this day. How are you, our friend?
I am doing very well. I think this is the second time we are connecting to the Syrian energy consecutively, which is I think needed. We of course wanted to speak around hypnosis, and we were wondering if you could potentially guide us through the layers around hypnosis.
Yes, we sense here that who you may want to contact is someone who is more well versed in the movement between worlds. That is, we suggest that you perhaps connect to one of these entities that could be known as a deity. We sense that this Lady Isis is coming forward. She has never moved through this vessel, though she has surrounded him with certain types of love and instructions on different occasions. And we sense that she has news that will allow for you to step into these layers of consciousness in a very, let's call it, assuaged, comfortable way. Would you be comfortable with that? We asked, dear Tam.
Yes, please.
So we will forward you to her then.
Thank you.
I come with sublime love from the infinite realms of the gods. I join you here this day to assist you in walking through the infinite layers of your mind and into these hypnotic or hidden states. I am known and worshipped often by the name Isis. I represent the fragment of the great maternal energy of the universe, the great singular field of all that is. And I bring love, comfort, compassion to you this day, dear Tam.
Thank you very much. And I think it would be really great to understand perhaps the layers of hypnosis a little bit more fully. Of course, there are certain layers that go into channeling that Mads does, and there's certain layers that fall into hypnosis that often are characterized in the same way, but they often lead to the same result with a lot of cases for people. Um, could you please walk us through the differences and maybe the similarities between the two?
Yes, thank you for being so specific in your questions, because this is helpful in the way that you perceive hypnosis. That is, how specific do you want to be in the expression of the content of the trance state? That's another way of phrasing this idea that in the channeling state, this is a type of voluntary possession. Often you will find, such as this individual, or in many people who connect from this point in your human timeline, that they find themselves in a fairly light state of trance. That is, even though they allow for something to step in, they themselves also merge parts of their conscious being into this. This makes for a very specific, very directed way of unfolding the hypnotic layers. Then, if we do move into, let us call it deeper states of trance, deeper states of emergence into this great unknown, this deep sea of the unconscious, you come into something that is more akin to a sleep state. And so hypnosis in its let's call it classical form, that is this type of regression that we sense that you are perhaps more interested in the, let's say, quirky stage acts of getting people to believe things and perform in weird ways. If we look at this regression state, you will see that this is very akin to what people do when they talk in their sleep, but it is directed, and therefore it, by being directed from the outside, it actually allows for a deeper layer of content to move up from this dream layer. So where when people talk in their sleep, they are often also expressing, as they do in many dreams, simply the content of the personality that is being degaussed or decompressed, let out. Here you will find that these deeper layers of akashic memory of the personality, that is things from the past lives, things perhaps from other parallel lifetimes, is merging and coming up. We could describe this process as an inverse process of what is going on now. That is where you are directing a type of slightly self-hypnotized individual into bringing forward content that serves you. Then in the usual hypnotic setup, it will be the person in the waking state that will direct content to come out of the person to serve the person that is in the trance state. So these are different ways of working with it. And I am very happy to go into what may be the advantages for people in general, but also for you personally in expressing this energy and working.
That would be, I think, wonderful. A little later on, I think what you mentioned there about people's personalities coming through when they're in a hypnotic state. It paints the picture to me that human beings have almost dual personalities in place, one with the subconscious and one with the unconscious part of their soul or body. Is that correct in what I'm saying, or why is it that people's personalities in different ways come out when they are under a hypnotic state?
What you are saying is correct. And the helpful way of thinking about this would perhaps be using some of the terms from Jungian psychology. This idea that there is a type of personal unconscious that is embedded within a more universal, we will use the term subconscious, which belongs to this. The idea that there is a deep layer of universal human configuration that feeds into the personal layer of the unknown configurations of your person. And the unknown configurations of your person are connected then to the concept that is called the shadow. This is what you are also expressing in saying that it is as if there are almost two sides to the human personality. Notice that there are usually at least two sides to every phenomenon, a front side and a back side. And that is why when you dive into more unified states of consciousness, which you do when action subsides, there more of this layer of what is subconscious, what can't be expressed in action or will in the current personality configuration. This will begin to seep in and attempt to unify itself, integrate itself into conscious awareness. This, we could say, is a lawful process of the universe. It goes on in all aspects, all corners of being. It repeats itself on a planetary scale, on an evolutionary scale, and on an individual scale. That is, there's simply a greater degree of connectivity, always trying to emerge, and it does so by having consciousness begin to encompass elements that it haven't touched before. The problem, of course, being that there is often barriers in place. There is often a great deal of discomfort with having these barriers traversed. And so that, for instance, speaks to the phenomenon of nightmare, when these are of a more personal quality, at least. That is, the nightmare is also the expression that something can't really touch the conscious person unless the conscious person begins to also destroy parts of itself. And that is a fairly terrifying process. So that is also why you may find personally that in your path of personal development, the more you have chosen to step into willful change, the more you have chosen to let things pass away and other things come into your life, the easier it has been for you to feel whole, happy, and integrated.
It's intriguing to understand. So, with I guess with nightmares, of course, what comes to mind for me at the moment with hypnosis too is, of course, with children and specifically speaking with children, of course, it's very common for children to gain nightmares um, itself. So could you comment on that part itself of why children specifically have nightmares in relation to their subconscious level and um, awareness?
Yes. Notice what your conscious mind or your mental configurations are already seeking. This speaks to a theme of your personal curiosity, who you are as an individual. And that is, you are already picking up on the part I didn't address in my previous answer. So, what I said was that, well, nightmares that arise from this personal layer, they often move into, well, certain terrors in for the waking person, the personality. With children, this is often different. That is, they are in their formative years, and so children find themselves more in a type of, we could call it a permanent channeling state. That is, they are often swept up in the energies that are moving through them. This can be quite beautiful to observe. But then this also means that when their consciousness can't focus or channel this energy, they will then often become attractors to, let's call it, the vultures of consciousness. These are certain creatures, beings, entities that you, for instance, know in your fairy tales or your folklores, but that modern people rarely prefer to talk about. That is, there are certain beings who exist and subside on energies that are generated by conscious beings. And children are simply, let's call it, very delicious meals because they are emitting so much energy and they do not have the personality barriers in place that will make this blocked out. That is, their energy bodies are also not quite defined, and this also means that they are seeping up. A lot of energy is leaking off that can be then absorbed by some of these more demonic entities. It is all, let's say, then a part of the balancing out of the child. That is in the greater purpose where all is allowed for. Then these entities also then serve to ward off the child's protective sphere, actually consolidating and strengthening their aura and their energy bodies, making these harder to access for these demonic beings, exactly because they are, let's say, probing the boundaries of it.
Right. So then, when would a human being's I guess aura uh, allow them to fend off any any of these? attack, so if you will?
Approximately at age 4, there when you will find language is shaped, conscious expression, self-identity is shaped, and has in the healthy development of a child grown into something that is dynamic yet static, that is defined yet able to change. This is a period where the nightmares will then begin to assume more of a character, often of, let's call it negative recollection. So where children before age 4 will be more susceptible to these demonic influences, children after that age will be more susceptible to nightmares that contain recalls of unpleasant things in their akashic bodies. So these these instances of terror or experiences of unpleasant night visions, nightmares, will be more akin to things that are unwanted as a part of the greater, let's call it, personal collective unconsciousness of that individual soul. We know this is quite complex for human beings to understand, but we will say then that when you then cross into age 8, you will find then that then it becomes more akin to adult trauma. That is, then it will be, most nightmares will have the character more presenting unwanted parts of the personal psyche in nighttime. And this is always an attempt to balance out these things, to make human beings face other sides of their existence, to also keep, we could say, a certain part of dynamism to the personality. So adults, fully grown adults, let's say people in their 40s, for instance, they will often find that the dream state is a type of vitalizing influence in their life, that having grown into certain patterns, modes of behavior, certain quite defined roles that they play in society and in relationship to others, the dream state becomes this type of balancing regulator that is constantly feeding and connecting them in to a more unified whole of energy. But it does so through symbols, through vision, through influences, through stirrings of emotions.
Lovely. And you talked about trauma there, which I wanted to, of course, cover. And of course, primarily for many people, hypnosis is used to uh, fix or help the client or the person who's looking for the hypnosis with their trauma. Um, where what we're trying to do right now is connecting nightmares in relation to how that develops over time towards creating subconscious trauma in place that the hypnosis helps. Um, is it correct in saying that uh, within time frames of a human's life, when they do have stages of nightmares or terrors through uh, when they're at a sleep stage, does that account for the level of trauma that their subconscious has? So let's say, for example, let's say a human who has had night terrors all their childhood life, would that specific person have more trauma in their adult life because of that?
It's a very good question. I sense it is related perhaps to the infinite question of the chicken and the egg. That is, you will notice that these states, these traumatizing night terrors, are actually brought on by underlying energetic imbalances that are unable to integrate themselves. And they will then express themselves or exacerbate themselves, moving into the psyche through very violent means. And that then becomes the night terror, which then amplifies the energetic imbalance. And so this is also to underscore that you will find that these categories, they do not, that we just explained, they do not quite relate to people who are in transitional periods of their life, because this, what you also sometimes call crisis, relates then to an expansion of the energy body. And with the expansion of the energy body, the person essentially becomes much like a child. You will find that this is also the reason for the instruction that to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become like a child anew. That this, you will have to go through these stages of expansion and integration. And here you will find things such as night terrors. You will also find things such as sleep paralysis. This phenomenon is quite common, but it is often most seen in people who are going through a strong transitional phase. And the state of sleep paralysis, well, referring to this example where people are awake, but they find they cannot move their body, and they often experience a demonic presence at the end of their bed, fixating them in that state. That will be very akin to what, let's say, the 2-year-old child will experience in their nightmares. This type of almost aggressive domination of the entire system of agency that operates in a human being.
It's fascinating. And with the energetic imbalances, would it be the case then where if the energetic imbalance isn't addressed or it isn't solved, then it will continue on even past that person's lifetime as well?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. Because this is the idea that the physical body dies from lifetime to lifetime, but the energy body moves on from lifetime to lifetime. And that is, the energy body is also, it is also mutable. It also changes, but it does so in a slower pace. And so this is essentially the reason for incarnation. That is, as soon as the energy body contains any kind of imbalance, it will be inclined to seek a physical expression, because the physical expression is one where it can be reconfigured, expressed, and then again set aright, integrated, expanded, renewed, restored. And as soon as the energy body is renewed or restored to a level, this is often what human beings call enlightenment. But we could simply say it's a type of greater balance of the conscious and the subconscious of these disparate layers. As soon as they're integrated, it makes more sense for the energy body to pass into more etheric states of experience where it will not be inclined to incarnate in these physical densities that we communicate in at this moment.
I think it paints the picture where, of course, quite clearly, some sort of etheric state was always used with humans who, let's say, are known to have transcended. If it's, I don't know, Saint Germain or Mary or anyone else, who we can look at, even you, Isis, as well. Um, it seems like it's always been a rite of passage where you've had to accept the etherical state in order for you to go forward. So, and we noticed that with a lot of different a lot of different beings who are well known for doing what they do, so to speak. So, um, could you please comment on why exactly is it a rite of passage that someone has to go into an etheric state to access?
I will first underscore that notice your insights here are essentially coming from the Gnostic layers of your own personal configuration. That is, when you apply these terms, when you conjure up Saint Germain or Mary, even my being Isis, you are exactly understanding this correctly, you are understanding that what happens to the human being is a type of immortal state where they find their consciousness focused only in the etheric, and there to the human beings who are in the physical, they will appear to be gods, they will appear to be someone who can will be addressed, who can be called for aid, who can essentially move in as a bridge between these different worlds without receiving the, we could say, taint of the physical, being encapsulated in the unconscious of the physical. Then to ask your question, this is perhaps the infinite question. Why does the sublime not simply dwell in itself? Why does it rejoice in seeing all these lesser manifestations of itself created? Well, it does so because it's, we could say, demonstrating the sublime quality of existence to itself. That is, notice that these divine instincts of curiosity, compassion, love, these can only essentially be explored and mapped out. They can only become complete if they begin to merge with things that they have a difficulty reaching. And so that is this idea that, well, you physical beings, you are still, well, in many ways thrown into a world of unconsciousness exactly to have and conduct this experiment on behalf of the universal, of the great divine all, that will it be possible to merge? Will it be possible to balance out these things? Will it be possible to create new and interesting ways of putting things together that were hitherto only constituted by the fact that they were separate? And so that is an experiment that we could say is also cosmologically repeated from the very different iterations of the universes. So you will find in the multiverse that there is an array of universes that are using slightly different physical laws, but also slightly different spiritual laws. And what happens if you were to see this as a sequence of development in that dimension of time, there you will have the understanding that these universes become more and more refined. And this is a refinement that you also see in your human beings. That is, you are essentially an image of the all. And therefore, this greater refinement, it's simply marvelous, it's wonderful, it's mesmerizing, it's breathtaking, it's beautiful, it's all these qualities. And these are, we could say, circular arguments. That is, that they are values unto themselves.
It's so interesting to go into these layers with you. It is fascinating. To me, there were a few questions that came to mind, which is within the multiple universes or planets that coexist together, each having different spiritual laws between themselves. Um, is there one specific spiritual law that is a commonality between each universe that is just accepted?
Yes. These, we could call them the law of vibration and the law of connection. And these are aspects of the same thing. But that is the law of connection, we could also describe as the hologrammatic principle, or the idea of the fractalized state. It's expressed often in the sentence as above, so below, and as within, so without. It is the idea that there is a deep level of correspondence in everything, that there is essentially, we could say, a very complex mathematical structure that is then simplified into more and more tangible, separate expressions of itself, but it is always embedded within a greater whole. You will find, if you were to observe such principles as the Mandelbrot set and this object, this Sierpinski casquette, we mean it's called, that is related to it, the pyramid with all the triangles within it, that this very much mirrors this principle. That is, it's also connected to, well, the simple law of three. And this law of three, it's repeated on many levels, but it's a type of amplification structure that to create anything stable, there needs to be a triangular structure, a dynamic structure of three, because this allows for the most simple shape of the dynamic that can be expressed. We hope that isn't too complex, but it is actually better approached in the realm of mathematics, or in perceiving geometry, also in perceiving, let's say, the rhythms and lawfulness of art. Then this principle of vibration, you also know that the law of attraction, the law states that what is equal seeks to meet what is equal. That is, we could say this underscores more the principle that there is a type of separation going on, but that this separation is constantly upheld and maintained only by the idea that things that are similar yet slightly different will seem to coincide. So in order for the visible world to be maintained, for the dimensions to be maintained, there needs to be this slight layer of difference. And you will find in the lower or the outer principles, such as the physical vibrations, height, width, depth, these are essentially principles that seem very, very separate, yet they all supplement each other. They are all irreversibly connected. And you will find this on a personal level, that when you move out into the world, you will be confronted by things that seem to be separate for you, but that you are always embedded in. So this seems so natural for human beings that it simply expresses itself for you as the idea of you being a body that's moving around the world. So the idea that there is a type of lawfulness, a dimensionality of your body that is embedded within a greater physical structure, which you call the outside world, but that's arrayed in the same dimensions. Then it expresses itself, we could say, emotionally, in you attracting things that are within your energy field, but yet separate enough that they are a type of challenge or supplement to the expansion of that energy field. And this is why, as soon as you begin to understand why something is happening for you in the outside world, what part in the inner state of yours that this is resonating with, and how this thing that exists in the outside world is actually something that corresponds with you, the sooner this thing will simply be integrated in your energy body, and this will take the shape for you as the lesson being complete, as you having learned all you needed to learn and know in this lifetime.
Could you quickly please comment on when would a human understand then when exactly a lesson or a imbalance of energy is correctly balanced? Like, when would they fully understand that? Is it just the case where they're not consciously thinking about the energy imbalance, or are there any sort of other signals in place?
You will find that, yes, that is the signal that it is still playing out its lesson, is that it stirs the emotional and the mental bodies. Well, indeed, if it's stirring the physical body, it's very much in place. So if you're experiencing a car crash or someone is hitting you, that's of course a sign that this is a full-on lesson that's happening. But if it's something that has already transpired or is more akin to an emotional lesson, you will find that the person who is still feeling very upset about something, who may have a very great fluctuation of emotions dealing with this is a sign that it is not yet integrated, that the more subconscious, a greater part of that human being is still trying to fit this experience into themselves. And then you will find that it skips to more placid states of emotion, and it skips to a more clear state of intellectual understanding when it has been sufficiently processed. So that is, for instance, you will notice that we can take, well, an example is a person has experienced something that they don't like, but that has made them upset and angry. And then this moves perhaps into a state of arrogance. That is a state of trying to achieve this idea of, well, I'm above this experience that happened. It's something that I want to distance myself to. This will fluctuate a bit, and then this will move into a state of pity. And when you are feeling pity, you are essentially combining the realization that you are above, distant from something, with the deep compassion that it is also something that you can acknowledge as existing in its own right, being allowed to be. And then you will find often that this state will then pass on to simply that element no longer being present. So the conscious recall of it is very little. And that's often when people will discover, for instance, that they have moved past a bad breakup or similar, is this idea that they all of a sudden realize that they haven't been thinking about this thing that was really upsetting for them at a point in their life for a long time. And when it comes up, it doesn't really promote much emotional response. And if it does, it is perhaps the shrug of the shoulders, a state of feeling compassionate about that state, understanding, but still also not affected by it directly.
What comes to mind right now, and you mentioned of how, of course, we went into more of a numerological discussion around laws of spirituality, and then the configuration of a emotional imbalance goes more into stoicism at that point. Can you please link together the assets of numerology, hypnosis, and stoicism, if you can?
Yes, this is quite beautiful because we could say that Stoicism is an approach like many other spiritual traditions. It's an approach that relies on the idea of acceptance. There is an element of radical acceptance to this tradition. So therefore, it also, we could say, discerns the harmony between what seems to be separate. So the Stoic will essentially move into a numerological understanding of it, or we could say a more divine understanding of what wells up from the subconscious. We hope this isn't too complex. What we are trying to express is the idea that the human being is assailed by many unwanted experiences, challenged by outside forces, by people that they don't like to be around, so forth and so on. This is then can be described as the state of sleep. This is a type of state of unconsciousness where you feel that this inside and outside is challenged. What Stoicism then strives to do is to make sense, assign value to many of these challenges, to many of the very disparate parts of reality, it sees clearly that these are lessons, these are things that are allowing for me to grow in my ability to retain both awareness of what is going on and also compassion for what may actually be something that I find is provoking many negative reactions in me. And this then skips to this divine mode of apprehension. And the divine mode of apprehension is very often combined, dependent on the type of personality experiencing it, but it's often expressed in different types of numerological visions. So even if you take things that are more, let's say, narrative or symbolic, such as fairy tales or parables, you will find that these often follow quite numerological structures, such as, for instance, the instance of the three that is used as a fundamental narrative structure, because this is how the divine mind makes sense of the physical world and structures it. So does this answer the question we would ask?
It helps a lot, and especially in my own experiences with people who I've worked with too. Um, I think also as well that just going back into Stoicism, oftentimes humans put Stoicism into the same bracket as someone who is less emotional, someone who is less expressive with their emotions. They maybe you'll often, well, I'd often hear people say nothing phases you. Could you comment on that aspect, please? On why exactly humans misinterpret Stoicism for someone being emotionless?
Yes, it is because when you exist in a more reactive mode of being, a more unconscious or a sleep-like state, you will have the idea, you will assign, say, more external identity to phenomena. And there you will find that the Stoic appears as someone who doesn't give off as much reaction as someone else. And what is truly happening with the Stoic is essentially that they are expanding their field of awareness. So the things that they find to be upsetting, they take into themselves as a part of themselves. And there they become like the placid sea, where dropping a single pebble into a vast expanse of a calm ocean, it doesn't stir it much. Whereas if you drop it into a glass of water, well, the glass of water might actually break and the water will fly out of it. And this is essentially the difference between these two elements. We could also, to illustrate this balance, notice that there is a other type of human temperament. We could almost say archetype. This is the psychopathology that you often know of as psychopathy. And this is essentially also someone who is not stirred by emotions. But what they do is that they take nothing as a part of themselves. So everything is seen as an outward layer. And that's another type way of dealing with this. But though we can then say that karmically, of course, these people exist in a very suffering state, and they do serve a purpose in the all that is, but that their trajectory through lifetimes will have to carry them through much suffering in order for their emotional bodies to then expand. But notice that to human beings that exist in this very reactive, this swept up state, what is sometimes described as the Rajasic in certain traditions, these people of the world, they often have a hard time discerning. So this idea of the Stoic may actually come off as a little callous, almost a little psychopathic, where it is exactly the opposite.
Incredible. And is there, I mean, of course, we're talking about hypnotic states and going into more trance-like states. Surely that is almost symbolic of someone going into more of a stoic mindset where they are on a representative level quite still itself to go into a trance. Um, of course, what comes to mind now is, of course, all the Stoic philosophers who have greeted us over the last 50 to 100 years. Uh, Oftentimes, they most likely were in either a hypnotic state or in a trance-like state at some point. Is that, am I far off the mark in that uh, conclusion?
No, I would actually like to mirror back to you that your impulses are already connected to the states of higher mind that informs the Stoic mind. So you will find that this inspiration, these perceptions and apprehensions, they are growing within you. They are expansive. And therefore, you may also find that what you are doing in these sessions is essentially affirming to yourself that you are connecting back into that layer and that it is working through you. So you yourself, you are connecting to this stoic layer of mind. And indeed, you will notice that what accompanies often these experiences, and even to a higher degree, well, successful hypnosis experiences or dreams that seem to come from a deep layer of consciousness, well, they seem to be accompanied by a state of greater awareness, a placidity that is expanding in the overall being of a person. And this is this stoic state of mind. There is even, you will notice in many antique Stoics, tendency to almost provoke these stirrings, these confrontations with the world, to seek out the hardship and see how it may challenge that state of placidity. In, we could say, similar spiritual traditions, there is even a practice in the tradition of Sufism, which was also influenced by some of these things, where you will deliberately seek the disapproval of the outside world, simply to train that state of inner awareness, this expansive state of taking everything, even the scorn, as something of value to you.
Yes, that's refreshing to understand and hear uh, itself. I think I realized that we've gone into a lot of different directions, similarly unrelated to hypnosis, which I think is still related, which is great. Um, when you when we talked a lot about we talked a lot about the sublime itself and what that looks like to certain people, to certain religions, to in different ways. How would you personally describe the sublime? Like, what, from the perspective that you hold now, what does the sublime actually represent?
The sublime represents the highest union of opposites. This is a definition that has been brought forward, we believe, perhaps by an individual such as Thomas Aquinas, also of the divine in and of itself. So these are synonymous, all these terms. But notice that the sublime then expresses the complete simplicity of complexity. That is the union of everything into a singular framework, a singular understanding, something that allows for, supports everything, that remains still even as things change on the surface level. That is also why different traditions enjoy fusing these opposite images into different ways of being. We could say in the state of the Trinity, for instance, you will find that this is a way of unifying the three principles: the manifest, the universal, not the unmanifest, the universal, and the specific. That is what is sometimes known as God the Father, will be the level that is never tangible, never visible, always out of reach, but allows for everything to be. The Holy Spirit will be the energy that allows for the universe to simply exist, the light emanating from the unmanifest. And the specific will be the principle that there is a type of focused consciousness, that is an individual human being that is focusing all of the totality in the divine in one specific expression. And that is, of course, deeply paradoxical. Another way of approaching this is, for instance, through the vision of the lingam, which is also, let's say, even geometrical principles of the circular and the vertical expressed in a type of erotic imagery. And that is that there is even a geometry to the quality of sexuality seen from the perspective of the divine. But you can, in a sense, choose whatever image you like yourself best to express this union of opposites, and you can create new ones abundantly and then see how they fill your life with meaning, purpose, and sense.
I'm wondering if you could also comment on how you feel like the human perception of the sublime may change in the next, let's say, 20 or so years coming up. Do you see do you see a change in people's perception of what the sublime really is from a human perspective?
Indeed, I do, because these things that you have known as ascension, this is a more, we could say, universally accessible path that was once mapped out in certain mystery schools, certain esoteric traditions that were more hidden off, more secluded. So it is simply the idea that more energy is moving into your experience in general. And this energy is at the moment, it is seeking to express itself in different ways. And thereby it is upsetting the dream state by pushing forward these conflicts, both within individuals and within the external world, that seeks a higher degree of unison. Well, this expression of unison then becomes expressed more in states of compassion, of understanding, of participation. And you will see that this is even mirrored technologically, so that you have already built systems that are much more akin to, let's say, the universal field, more akin to Holy Spirit than they are to the singular illuminated being. So you find in your internet, for instance, or you find in this process of exchange, that there is essentially several centers influencing and playing into themselves at once. This is why you also describe this as a co-creation. So it is with this greater expansion that there is actually a growing frequency of love accessible to human beings. And the expressions of this love is also greater understanding, it's greater connectivity, and it's greater opportunity, greater choice.
Okay. I'm going to have to replay the words that you've said again to fully comprehend what you mentioned there. I'm noting that the time that we have is uh, is of the essence, of course. Is there any other comments that you'd like to make uh, about our current session and what you've gathered so far?
Yes, I would like to sum it up, and I would also like to stress the quality of, let's say, receptivity. So that is that there is in your system of timekeeping also an element of restriction. And notice that this system is being replaced more by a fullness of organic development. So that is that what is actually happening here is that there are certain energies, almost like an atomic clock, that move themselves in, that merge and complete certain cycles, and then leave this energy body that has been developed here by several individuals in a greater state. So it allows for more connectivity in being itself in the physical universe. And this is akin to hypnosis. So if we are to take hypnosis as a personal or individual experience of separation of our consciousness, of these deep states, then what is growing is awareness, it is wakefulness, it is the greater ability to hold and contain light. And if you look at this way, you will find that your life itself is actually moving from these states of more rigid separation, of confusion, of obligation, of feeling tied down into a more, we would even use the term affluent state of energetic abundance. So your ability to choose what expressions you will have, and also your ability to sublimate certain impulses that may have seemed darker, that was being pushed away as separate for you, they are actually growing and accumulating. So, for instance, an impulse such as, we could say, avarice, simply wanting to have a lot, is then being sublimated into a state where you will find that having resources allows for you to do and undertake things that are of the benefit to you and to others. So this is a higher state of the same quality. And this means also that what exists as separate in the more hypnotic states of being, the more unconscious states of being, they are essentially all pushing themselves to become higher states of purposefulness, embedded with a greater sense of meaning and understanding. And hoping that these messages have not confused you too much, I will also state that the reason, notice the wonderful circle in this, that Isis have come forward this day is that I am often seen as that wonderful maternal energy that governs more the human collective in this moment as you are moving away from the more fatherly energies, but also someone who then guides people through stages of mystery into union with themselves. And this is indeed what we have been doing this day and what you are doing in general in your life. So I would also like to ask you, dear Tim, what kind of experiments do you envision in your work with hypnotic states? Because we sense that there may be something calling you here.
Oh, there's plenty of things there. I think fascination with hypnotic states and increasing your DNA activity. I think, of course, what we talked about with stoicism and hypnotic states. numerology with hypnosis, and essentially hypnosis becoming well, of course, a regular occurrence with many people, including children early on in their developmental stages. Um, I think is a fascination that I think is going to be increasing in the next couple of years for me, at least. But this was such a prevalent session with you, Isis. Thank you so much for your time, space, and presence.
And I would like to give you the idea, the encouragement, the possible path of you learning to be someone who puts people under. That is, you have a very loving, guiding presence. You have something that is assuring without being intimidating. You have a great clarity in your loving presence that would allow for you to be a very, very great guide for people. That is, you will give them the comfort to relax into these states, and there they can pull out things and integrate them. And this would be a very loving act that would indeed also bring a great deal of excitement, illumination, surprise, and wonder to your experience. So that, yes.
Thank you. Yes, it's something that I've always considered. Of course, I've always considered uh, maybe which modality to focus on at one time, and oftentimes it's been focusing on too many, or thinking that one thing is more needed than the other. But I think yes, definitely there's a space here for me in hypnosis, and I think in the next few years we're going to see a lot of different developments with me in this space.
Yes, because know that what you have to offer is needed, and it doesn't need to take the shape of a need, because it is simply something that is a boon to the world. And therefore, I also have been happy to be able to bring my boons and bounty of insight and love to this interaction. Seeing it mirrored back to me was a deep pleasure. And with that, I leave you with my deep love and appreciation, my blessings, and my gratitude for our interaction this day, dear Tham.
Thank
Farewell.
you. Farewell.